economics and also environmental economics. Welcome, Bapak Arianto. And our second discussion is Dr. Vivi Alatas, CEO of Asa Creativita. She holds a PhD in economics from Princeton University. Dr. Vivi also a former lead economist from the World Bank's Poverty Program in Indonesia. Again, welcome, Ibu Vivi. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we structured this webinar into 3 parts. First, we have 55 minutes presentation from Dr. Rimawan, and then we continue with the 30 minutes discussion from Dr. Arianto and Dr. Vivi, 15 minutes each for discussion. And then we have a Q&A session from audience for an hour. Okay, without further ado, I would like to invite our speaker, Dr. Rimawan, to deliver his presentation. Dr. Rimawan, 55 minutes for your presentation time. The time is yours.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share research that we've done together with Mas Putu Sanjika Wibisana and also Mas Arya Wikita. Now I'd like to share the materials, the presentation for you. Okay. So I guess many people have probably have the same reaction when it's when you read the title. If there is a such thing as unregulated corruption, then what would happen with the corruption has been regulated? Is it become lawful? No, this is not the case. So, but this is I don't know how to put it in English. Basically, there are the fact that in Indonesia, some types of corruption has been regulated, but there are some of type of corruption hasn't been regulated for a long period of time. Although we already ratified the United Nations Convention Against Corruption since 2003. However, the government do not do anything to accommodate for recommendation of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption into the Indonesian regulation. So, so this is the talk will be split in this way. So it is not easy to measure.
Sorry, Mas Rimawan, you might want to maximize the display.
Oh, I already maximized the display. Huh?
Maybe the different screen.
Oh, okay.
Oh, sorry. I need to split. Sorry.
Yeah.
Do I need to swap like this?
Ah, cool. Yes.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. Sorry about this. So this is the back again about the corruption. When we trying to estimate the corruption, how to record the corruption is actually, it is not easy because what we see in any type of crime, it's usually what we see is just the recorded crime. But the question from law and economics perspective is always, what about the underlying corruption itself? If we talk about the bribery or we talk about the burglary or common petty crime, that will be very easy because the victim is in there. Many countries conducted a survey, what I call victimization survey. For instance, like in the UK, they have a victimization survey for every 2 years. And it's involved about 40,000 households. So they're asking about, whether you are the victim of a crime for the last 12 months, and then they answer yes or no. And then afterward, they ask, did you report to the police if you are victims? Now, in these circumstances, that will be much easier to estimate the unrecorded corruption, the unrecorded crime. But for the corruption itself, that will be very daunting to do that. Why? Because there are 3 types of corruption. One is a bribery, and then extortion and embezzlement. Now, to those who are the victims of extortion, that will be very easy if they were surveyed and then saying that, okay, I'm the victim of extortion. But the question is that what would happen if you are the perpetrator for the bribery, will you say, okay, I do that? No, of course, this is a problem that we encounter in these circumstances. Now, so what are the alternative method to measure corruption? There are several things. First is the court decision. However, this is the problem. If we're talking about the comparability between across countries, that will be problematic because some countries do not allow the court decision displayed in public places, for instance, or like in a website. In Indonesia, it's open. But in the UK or in other countries, usually we have to get a permit from the court itself. Now, if we talk about the victimization survey, that again, this is some bias that will be very difficult to control in these circumstances. And then the last thing, usually people using the index. Now, index is nice in a way, but and also it's easy to create a comparable measures. However, people still asking about the validity in terms of the, whether the self-confess or whether the perception of people can actually quite valid in measuring the corruption. Okay, so now I just want to move to directly to the situation in Indonesia, and then I try to compare it with Malaysia. So the interesting thing is that both countries have ratified the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. Indonesia ratified that in 2003, but Malaysia ratified in 2008, 5 years after Indonesia. In 2006, the government of Indonesia ratified Act number 7, 2006, which acknowledged the UNCAC, and they have a commitment to accommodate in Indonesian jurisdiction, judicial system. Now, and then in 2009, the Malaysian has MACC. There's like a comparable to KPK. Although originally they already have since 1967, I think. Now, what are the difference between them? Let me go to the Malaysia first. Malaysia in 2008, they do the amendment of the MACC Act. Now they implemented the recommendation from the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, including tackling the private sector corruption. But what would happen what was happening in Indonesia? The government and also the parliament ratified the amendment of KPK Act, which we can see now. It's weakened the KPK systematically. So this is a two different thing. So if you see the recommendation from the review of several countries regarding how close we are in relation to the implementation of the UNCAC, Indonesia is only 58% for the implementation of the UNCAC recommendation. Another complexity that we have Indonesia has is that the Anti-Corruption Act in Indonesia only applicable in Indonesia. Now, this is totally different to the UKBA, UK Bribery Act in 2010, or the FCPA by the American, that they can chase anybody who do the bribery all over the world. The similar thing occurred for the MCCC Act, that they can chase any Malaysian or the Malaysian company who open the business outside of the country. If they act in the host country, they do a corruption, then they can chase them, but not in Indonesia. So we are limited by the boundary, geographical boundary. Now, this is the four recommendation of the UNCAC that hasn't been implemented or accommodated in our judicial system. One is the private sector corruption. The second one is illicit enrichment. The illicit enrichment is usually is related in Indonesia. Usually, people talking about rekening gendut, yeah, the huge account that some government official has, And the value can be reached to up until more than 1 trillion rupiahs, for instance. And then foreign bribery, and the last thing that hasn't been accommodated also is the trading of influence. So these are 4 recommendations that we haven't included into the Anti-Corruption Act. Although start from the big, probably about 2009, 2010, many scholars always said that we need to ratify, we need to amend to the amendment for the Anti-Corruption Act, but the result is that the amendment of the KPK Act, so which is totally different from the recommendation that we had. Okay, now I just want to give you to see the complexity of the implementation of the act itself. Yeah, the Anti-Corruption Act. So we do have the asymmetric regulation of anti-corruption measures, basically. So for state-owned enterprise, OECD-based multinational corporation, or non-OECD-based multinational corporation, but in their home country, they implement the OECD-like act, whereby they can chase anybody who bribery all over the world, then the Anti-Corruption Act is actually regulated. So in that circumstances is that they for the multinational corporation in the B and C, they have to comply to 2 laws: the laws in their home countries and also the law in a host country. But what about the D? This is the non-OECD based multinational corporation in which the home country doesn't have implemented. They don't have implemented the OECD-like act. They don't have to do that. Okay, they don't have to comply. And in Indonesia, there is no such thing as a private sector corruption. A similar thing applied for the private enterprises in Indonesia. So many people thought that, private enterprises in Indonesia is, they said, well, there is no corruption. And I said that you are totally wrong. You are totally wrong. The corruption is huge in there. Now, the problem is that what would happen if there are 2 people from a different firm. They are all from a private corporation, and then they do some kind of a bribery thing like that. And then even if you call for the Novel Baswedan in there, the Novel Baswedan witnesses, he cannot do anything. He cannot do anything. Why? Because there is no such law that regulate that. That's the situation that we have. Now, if we compare now between the supervision between the, state-owned enterprise and private companies, then in terms of the regulation, we're talking about 8, the ratio is 8 against 3. Whereas in terms of the institution who do the monitoring and enforcement is 9 against 4. So this is the situation. So basically, if you have a private corporation in Indonesia, it's almost like lawless, basically. You do whatever you like. Yeah. Now, our data, we do have the data for the corruption, and we collect the data, and then from the court decision. This is the situation that we have. 59% of the corruption in Indonesia has been contributed by the private sector corporation. But then people may ask, wait, hey, hang on. Well, you said that there is no regulation for that. But those who are caught in here, they actually relate to the government provision. The government, public goods provision, that kind of stuff. So they have a link to the government to some extent. But one thing that we don't know as yet is what would happen if there are 2 or more than private corporation, and then they do bribing among themselves or thing like that. We don't know. We don't have the data. Now the right hand side is very important, and I think is very certain when seeing this kind of data. If you are if there is a corruption in in state-owned enterprise, then you during the prosecution you will be the final conviction, it's usually the sentence about 76% out of the total money that you the public money that you take. Yeah, but if you are in a private corporation, the sentence it says only 9%. Don't ask me why, because I'm not a legal lawyer. I don't know. I just collect the data, and then when we see this data, this is the situation. So this is the asymmetric treatment towards the between the state-owned enterprise and private corporation. Okay, now we are thinking about, you know, all along about, you know, how we do this, you know, especially when we want to know about what actually the impact of the unregulated corruption that occur in particular countries. For instance, like in Indonesia, we have some areas, some sector has been highly regulated, but then in other areas, for instance, in private corporation, there is no such regulation whatsoever. So we want to see what is the impact of having unregulated corruption in Indonesia. So the way to do this, of course, that's it'd be much easier to use the experiment. We use the experiment in this case, and then we're trying to compare what would happen if the corruption hasn't been regulated, or, you know, people doing corruption, but then there is no law enforcement whatsoever. And then secondly, we're trying to replicate what's going on that have been implemented at the moment, which is the corruption in most areas, especially in the public sector, has been regulated, but the sentencing is very low. So we call it as a mediocre sentence of mediocre fines, for instance. And the last one that we want to see is what would happen if we implement the punitive damage approach. We call it as a social cost of a corruption. So what would happen if we trying to enforce the social cost of corruption as the fines to the corruptor? Okay. But then we see the literature and the impact of the punishment, and it is not easy. Particularly is the publication by Uzi Gnisi and Aldo Rusticini in 2000, or sometimes they also have in a book chapter in 2004. They found that imposing mediocre fines increased the average number of late-coming parents picking up to their children in a nursery. So Uzi Gnisi and Aldo Rusticini did a field experiment in Israel using the nursery. So they split. They have two groups of nursery, and in one group, usually people, the parents late in picking their kids, but and there is no fines whatsoever. Usually the maximum lateness is about 30 minutes. Yeah, that's the maximum. And then they're trying to compare with the treatment groups, which is they inform the parents, if you late picking up of their kids, then we will impose you with mediocre fines. Now the result in the right hand side is quite striking, and it worries me actually, because it shows that when the fines is mediocre, it's some sort of like a promoting people to violate the law, because they can say, okay, I can pay. If I pay with mediocre fines, then I can be late for 1 or 2 hours, and they don't have any guilty feelings. So this is what Uzi Gnisi and Aldo Rusticini published in 2000 or 2004. Back to the old literature, older literature with the Beccaria in 1764. Now I think this is much more reasonable, because he said that the modus intensity of punishment may increase reoffending behavior. Yeah, reoffending behavior comparison to high intensity punishment. So I can understand that. I think if this is related to reoffending behavior, this is fine. But the finding, the finding from Uzi Gnisi and Aldo Rusticini, it worries me, because what would happen? You know, the question is that whether because now what we do is basically we imposing a mediocre sanction to the corruptor. Does it mean that the corruption in Indonesia is huge because of the finding like in Usignizi and Aldurus teaching? Okay, so this is the situation that we have. So we have using the experimental approach. Yeah, so we may design a scenario, of course, that cannot be implemented in real life, but we can do it in lab. Yeah, this is the nice thing from the experiment. So we can, in these circumstances, that we can estimate what is the impact of the unregulated corruption, and also what we might think as well, what would happen if we impose the punitive damage approach, whereby the corruptor will be sentenced according to the damage that has been created, and they have to pay all of the damage that occurred. Now, the experimental approach that we have so far is based on the Klaus Abing series of the experiment for the bribery game. So the bribery game only consists of two players. So one is two individuals, and then one will offer a bribe, and the other will accept or reject. Okay. But then what we will be concerned about is that the game does only represent the bribery and extortion. If you trying to model the bribery and extortion, it's just only the who move first, basically. When you reverse the movement, then you can use exchangeably between bribery and extortion. However, the bribery game experiment doesn't take into consideration the embezzlement part. Okay, and also they don't take into consideration what would happen, the impact of the corruption to the public goods game when people contribute to the public provision. So this is something that we don't see so far. This is the one that we're trying to develop. And we introduced what I call two-stage public goods embezzlement game and public goods bribery game. And we don't use the extortion because the extortion is basically the reverse game as the bribery. So the bribery game can represent the extortion. Okay, so how the design. So the design is as follows. So we have three players with homogeneous endowment. In these circumstances, we give them 100 ECU. So the ECU is the experimental currency. And for each ECU is actually 400, about 4,000 rupiahs. So about 400 rupiahs. 400. So that's about 40,000 rupiahs for each people. Okay, so they have then they play the public goods game in stage one. So how much they will contribute to the public goods, and then afterward we have the state budget obviously to some extent sort of like state budget, and then for the embezzlement game we choose one player randomly, and that player we give information to that player that they can take all of the money, sum of money, or they don't take anything from the public goods money, for the contribution, the public contribution. So they have a decision to whether they embezzle or not. Okay, but then afterward we run some kind of a randomization that they are facing. We inform them that they are facing some kind of a detection rate. We don't tell them about how much the detection rate, but we said here is 15%. In real life, we don't know about whether we have been detected or not when you do the corruption. So this is the idea is as follows. Yeah. So this is for the public goods embezzlement game. We play the public goods game, and then in the second stage, somebody will be chosen randomly. And then they have a right to either they take all of the money or some of the money, or they don't take anything at all. Yeah. And then afterward, we implement the estimation, the calculation of the payoff for the public goods game, which, yeah. Secondly, this is the public goods bribery game. It's a bit intricate here that the same thing occurred for the public goods game on the first stage, but the second stage is slightly different. We choose randomly one player, and we tell them that in order, if you want to take that public money, then you need to negotiate with the players outside. So this is like a pot, yeah, like a computer. They play against computer. Now, if you interested in taking the money, then you need to share to give a bribe to some extent. Yeah, they give us share to the pot, to the computer. Now we said that the computer will accept if the offer is more than 28%. Now this one is based on the experiment survey of the experiment in the ultimatum game that shows that actually the Rubinstein ultimatum game usually doesn't work. Because in the Rubinstein, as you know, when you're splitting the pie and you move first and you move sequentially, you take almost everything and then you left the other person with almost nothing. But the reality is that, you know, many research shows that 28%, this is the bottom line, the minimum. And then afterward, the computer will randomize again to see whether the person will be caught or not so that will be the 15%, whether they will be convicted or not. Okay. So now we go to so we have three groups here. First is the control group. In the control group, there is no punishment. Okay. So you do whatever you like the one that we have, but in there is no punishment. So the 15% is actually become zero. Yeah, then they are not being detected and they are not being announced as well. So there is no announcement. Now in here, the announcement means that we just give information to all players that in this stage, the money has been taken by one of the players. The public money has been taken by one of the players. This is in the case in which that somebody take the public money and they are convicted, yeah, and they are detected. Okay. If not, they can do elsewhere. The other situation is that somebody take the money, but the randomization doesn't do not result in a conviction. That's fine. Then we don't announce that, because in real life, of course, there are many corruption that's undetected, and we don't know as yet. Yeah. So that's the situation. Now, in the second stage, in the second group, we have the intervention group. This is the T1 group. This is the reminiscence, the situation in Indonesia. So we used fixed and mediocre fines. So in these circumstances, we put 25 ECU, regardless of how much money that you take from the public money. Okay, and the last one is the T2 group. So this is we multiply 2.5 times the amount of public money that has been embezzled. Now the question is that what would happen if you take the money, somebody has been convicted and they have to pay the money, and then the money is much higher than their endowment. So we set to be a zero. So that individual will only have the participation fee. Yeah, that's it. Now in experiment, you're not allowed to make yourself financially. The experimenter are not allowed to have the opportunity to financially profitable. Yeah. So because this is a difference between experiment and gambling is actually very, very tiny, very thin, and we need to ensure this. Okay, so what about the subject of the experiment? So we have 540 pool subject of the experiment, and we announced this to all of the 18 faculties in Universitas Gadjah Mada, and we have 378 subjects were selected randomly, and we have 9 groups. And each group has 42 subjects in each group. and there are 14 subgroups in each group. So that's consisting of 3 players. Now this is the intricate things when there's some complexity to do, because what we want to do is we don't want to do the finitely repeated games, but what we want to do is evolutionary game. So in evolutionary game, no players can allow to meet with the same players more than once. So you only meet once. Now this is the randomization for this is quite daunting actually to ensure that those individuals moving from one game to the next without seeing another players, the same players more than once. Okay. Now, so we have a 42% of the are male and 57 female. Now, this is the sequence of the experiment. So the sequence is that we do the one-shot game, and then afterward we do, this is a 15 evolutionary game for 15, and then one-shot game again and evolutionary again for the 15 repetition. So they have, of course, we have a control group, treatment 1 and treatment 2. Now the question is that why do we need to do the one-shot game and evolutionary side by side? Because we want to see the stability of the consistency of the behavior of people. Now, what about the result? So this is the when we trying to so this is some variable of interest. So we want to see about the probability of people, the likelihood of contribution, to public goods, and then also the intensity of contribution to public goods. But at the same time, we want to see as well about the likelihood of corruption. So this is the probability to do the corruption and also the intensity of the corruption. And then we can also estimate how much is it the contribution per corruption that has been conducted. Okay. Now, this is some definition of some variables that's back to for the deterrent. We use the deterrent effect. We use a Becker 1968 back to Stephen Savell in 2001, 2007, and also Nono Grupa in 1997 who did excellent review on that. So what we need to estimate here is about the probability of corruption and also the intensity of the corruption. Okay, so in terms of the investment contribution, so this is the total value of the corruption divided by the total value of contribution. And then in terms of the welfare efficiency, we compare between the potential welfare and the actual welfare. We did a normality test. Only one of the variable follow the normality test. And then we use a simple comparison group. What is that? Average mean comparison between a control group and the T1 group, and then T1 group at the T2 group, and then C group, and also to the T2 group. Okay. So this is the result from the one-shot game in relation to the impact of the incident of the corruption and also the impact to the intensity of corruption. If you can see the differences is striking. The no punishment is usually quite high, and it's but then the difference between fixed punishment and social punishment is not that high, but the total, this is the interesting thing to see, because although the corruption is high, and provided that you don't hear that there is a corruption, apparently the total contribution for no punishment is the highest. So this is give us we want to know actually what would happen to the unrecorded corruption. Why is it? Probably we can survey two people. What do you think about private corruption in Indonesia? There's probably people, if we ask them to compare with the state-owned enterprise, for instance, or multinational corporation, probably their view more probably relate to this finding. Okay. Now, this is for the if we're trying to compare the proportion of the difference in the mean this is the situation. So in terms of the impact of the incident of the corruption, it's significant at 1%, and also this is in an embezzlement game and also in a bribery game. This is when we do the evolutionary stuff. Okay, I need to speed up because my time. Okay, and also the intensity, it shows as well, the intensity are quite different. It's significant here, both in an embezzlement game and also in a bribery game, especially when you compare between the control group and the treatment group, and even with the among the treatment group, there are also difference. Now, this is the impact of the likelihood to contribute. In terms of the likelihood, now this is interesting to see that the likelihood of the contribution is the highest if you what is that? If you punish using the social cost of crime. Okay. Now, okay. So this is the. Now I just want to show you. This is the corruption contribution. Okay. But then what we need to see is the effectiveness of the sanction. So how to relate this in a policy is that what would happen is that I use the T1 as the reference. Yeah, we use the T1 as a reference and then see the difference between if the T1 can set we set T1 as equal to 0, for instance, then what would happen with the difference with the no regulation or with the social punishment? So this is the situation. The contribution is always high in either that's for the we estimate here the incident, the minimum and the maximum value of the incident, and also this is the in terms of the incident. In terms of the embezzlement and the bribery, yeah. And this one is the contribution. So there are some differences here, yeah. If you can see, the impact of the probability may be lower, but the intensity of the contribution is quite high, and this is significant. Okay. Now this is the welfare efficiency. Now, this is the last one of my presentation that I think we need to contemplate more on this. I don't know whether this is the right way to say that this one is a revelation aversion, or is it some kind of ostrich effect? The ostrich effect means that they don't want to see the bad news to some extent. So the ostrich usually put their head down to the sand. Now, so if we take a look at this, the incidence is high, yeah, but this is in one shot game. If we see this, this is in a probably this one is more is much easier, yeah. So this is the impact incident of the corruption and the probability to contribute. Okay. Now this one is a puzzling, to be honest, for me, because why is it that people do when there is no regulation, the intensity of the corruption is huge, but the contribution is also big. Is it because they don't hear that there is no that there is a corruption? Oh, I don't know. Yeah. Now this is the situation that's probably interesting to see, and the danger here is that what would happen then? The implication, like in Indonesia, for instance, when in one country we have two systems, to some extent like the two system. Some sector has been highly regulated, but other sector is basically very loose. There is no such thing as a corruption regulation. Now, what would happen in a future? Now, the further research agenda. Of course, we acknowledge there are so many caveats in here. Another inquiry that we may take in the future is that what would happen if we announce the perpetrator during the experiment? Because in our design, we don't say, okay, Mr. X took the money, for instance. No, we don't say that. We only say that the public money that has been collected has been taken by one of the players. That's it. But we don't do naming or shaming or anything else. And then the second one is that what we can do as well is that we can record the time to make a decision, because we can test about the pro-social behavior in these circumstances is still intuitive in this setting. Yeah. I don't know the answer, but it's very, very interesting to see that. Now, another thing that we may do is that, because at the moment we can work together with among other universities. For instance, that we run this experiment with several other universities, then that will be very interesting to see. You know, if we upscale the experiment involving several universities, because Z3 will be allow us to do so. It's just only but of course there is some complexity in terms of the quality of the internet and etc. Now, and then further investigations would be conducted for about the revelation aversion, or what I call it as a revelation aversion. I think this is for me. I'm sorry that probably take. I do hope that we can have a discussion afterward, and any comment and critics are welcome. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rimawan. It is excellent presentation. It's an eye-opener for me that do not have any experience on experimental studies. And maybe some of the participants is coming from the health, economics or public health. Maybe I saw some of my friends from BPJS Kesehatan also attending this. Maybe can ask in the Q&A session. And yeah, for the Q&A session, I would like to inform for the participant to prepare the question for Q&A session. We have two ways here. First, if you would like to ask a question directly to speakers, please raise your hand and I will call you to ask the questions. And the second way is you can also put your question in the chat box and I will deliver the question to the panelists. Okay, move to the discussion session. I would like to invite Dr. Arianto Patunru to discuss the presentation, 15 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mas Pugo, and thank you, Mas Rimawan. It's an honor for me to participate in this Mubyarto Public Policy Forum, and on behalf of the project, Indonesia Project, we thank also UGM for the collaboration. I think this is the 5th, if I'm not mistaken. Let me share my screen. Hold on. Is it seen now, Mas Pugo?
Yeah.
Is it full screen?
Not yet, still on PDF.
Oh, hold on. Sorry. Is it full now?
Yeah, we can see the whole text as well.
Okay. Well, thanks again for the opportunity to discuss the paper, Mas Rimawan. I really enjoyed reading it. But let me just recap what you just present. So the question of the research is, can a harsher punishment create a deterrence effect on corruption? Right, and the hypothesis is that yes, it can, and this is on the contrary to Nisi and Rusticini 2004 paper. I will have a comment on that. And then the approach that Mas Rimawan and co-authors use is the experimental economics with finitely repeated games. And the findings there is that the deterrence effects is evident, and there is no explicit policy implication in the paper. So I don't know if in the next version, Mas Rimawan will have some policy implication for the next round of the paper. So this is just some immediate reactions to the paper when I was reading it. So first, I think there needs to be some more clarity on key definitions. For example, as Mas Rimawan himself admitted in the beginning, people might get confused with the term unregulated corruption. At first, I thought what he meant was just corruptions in the private sector, pure private sector, for example. But when I saw the presentation, it seems to me that the corruptions that they are talking about always involve public officials as well. So I'm not sure what is really defined in this unregulated corruption. But in the presentation, I think what he means that sectors that are just not regulated with corruption law, for example, or policies like that. And then another definition that I think needs clarity, more clarity, is about the fines. In the paper, they only mention about mediocre fines and then harsh fines, but we don't really know, the gradation. And this, I think, affects how we interpret the results later on, because there are some numbers in the results, but we don't really know the marginal change from mediocre fines to harsh fines. So it's not really elasticity or something like that, right? And the impact to be estimated in the title of the papers is estimated the impact of regulated corruption, or is it really a regulation of the currently unregulated corruption? So I searched some literatures. There are some papers about regulating unregulated currently unregulated corruption. So maybe that's what they are aiming for. And now on Nisi and Rusticini, so I read the paper, and actually the most quoted one is the 2000 version of the paper, which is in the Journal of Legal Studies. But I'm not sure if this is the right counterpoint, because I don't think that's really about corruption. It's about a fine, right? So in that 2000 paper, actually the title is "A Fine is a Price." So the story is about households putting their kids in the childcare, and they are late in picking their kids, so they are given fine. So usually they pay about 70 shekel per day, but if they are late, now they impose a fine of 10 shekels, or a fine, right? So that's just about fine. I don't think that's really comparable with the corruptions that Mas Rimawan and co-authors are analyzing. And this Nisi and Rusticini probably is more similar to the famous story of babysitting co-op by Krugman about interaction among households in babysitting in the Capitol Hill. So it's about the price they have to pay if they cannot do something, but it's not illegal in the sense that there is no cost to the public, because in this Nisi and Rusticini, actually everyone is happy, right? The parents are happy because they can afford to be late, and the childcare has extra payment, and the children are taken care of, right? So that's number 4. Number 5 is about the punishment intensity. Again, as I mentioned, I don't really understand why is it only 2 there. It's more like it's almost like a binary choice between harsh fines and fixed and mediocre fines. And then the last thing that puzzled me is the link between corruption and contribution. maybe because the way the story is being told in the paper, maybe it needs improvement in the sense that we know the channel from corruption and then the contribution to the public goods and how they interact one another, right? Let me move on to two issues that I want to highlight. And I think it's important in studies about corruption. And I'll start, let me motivate that with a passage that I copied from Pak Mubyarto's paper in the Bulletin of Indonesian Economic Studies in '84. So Pak Muby said that society will never see an end to corruption as long as motivation and opportunity, the preconditions for any human act, continue to escape attention. So we immediately, now, of course, most of us or most economists will think that is looking at the problem of corruption from economic point of view, right? Motivation and opportunity. And then for although there may be ample motivation, a potentially corrupt person will be unable to indulge his compulsion if no opportunity presents itself. So this is about expected cost and benefit, right? Mas Rimawan did mention that in the paper in the beginning in the narrative, but it's lost when or maybe the way I read it, it's not really linked again in the part when they start doing the experiment, right? So I think the narrative in the paper can be tightened more with this kind of the way we look at the corruption, at least from economic point of view. And based on this passage, I think this is, at least for me, this is the way I look at this problem, right? So it's really about the expected cost and expected benefit, right? So there is probability issue here. So in the first equation there, the way I looked at the cost is just the probability of getting caught or probability of getting arrested times the disutility of punishment, right? So that's the level of punishment. I think this is where the paper is focusing on, like harsh or mediocre fines, right? And not really on the benefit side. But why corruption is there? I think the corruption happens because the individual see the cost of doing it. Number one here is less than the expected benefit of doing it, right? And this is the way I think to address corruption is to look at these four components: the probability of arrest, and that is the law enforcement, police, KPK, and all that is here, right? And the punishment, the law, it's the system itself, the prison, the fines, and everything. And then here is the system, the benefit, the system that is really related to the expected benefit. I call it CPS, or corruption-prone system, or you can just see it as the probability of corruption happening, and then times the utility of corruption in the eye of the individual who does corruption. And I think this is where some of the scholars, including economists, are focusing on, right? So for example, if we read Pak Muby's paper, he mentioned about social justice for all the people, and he mentioned that Pancasila might be one way to go to this social justice for all the people, and that's actually related to the probability of corruption happening, right? And another author that was cited by Pak Muby is Professor Aceh Partadireja. He mentioned that it's actually religion, but whatever it is, it's dealing with how we see the expected benefit of corruption. And then another one is from my good friend Ross McLeod. I think he's in the audience. It's actually here. It's the how alignment of interest between principal and agent. So I'll talk about this in the next slide. So Ross looks at the corruption as a principal and agent problem. I think that's a good way to look at the problem of corruption. So because they can discipline our way of thinking about the corruption, and then when we write a paper like Mas Rimawan, I think the story will become more interesting, at least, right? So this is the way I interpret Rose's paper. So MacLeod's forthcoming, I think this is going to come out in the Encyclopedia of Corruption Law. So as I said, Rose looked at the issues of corruption as a principal agent problem. But he said that what we have to focus on more is on the public sector, not really on the private sector. Why? Because the interest in the private sector, it's more or less aligned already, right? So the interest of principal, the owners in the private sector, is to get employees with high integrity. And the interest of agent, the employees, is to, of course, to get good remuneration for their effort. And more or less in the private sector, these interests are aligned already. But in the public sector, unfortunately, that is the problem. Why? Because the remuneration for the politician, government official, other public sector employees are really below the market level, right? So there is these differences really create the incentive to have extra payment outside from what they get. So the interest here in the public sector is not really aligned, and that causes the systemic corruption. So here we can see that people like Rose MacLeod really look at the corruption issue from the benefit point of view of doing it and how to deal with it. So how to actually address the problem, not merely by punishment or stick, but more on the carrot side. So how to incentivize not to do the corruption. And in this case, he looks at the differences in the remuneration. And if I look at his other paper with Sita Rosdania, and there is this comparison of remuneration. This is in the Bulletin of Indonesian Economic Studies 2018. And we can see actually stark differences of remuneration between private sector and public sector, right? So this might might explain the problem. Of course, there are some other issues also, but this actually contribute a lot to the problem of endemic corruption in Indonesia. So this, I hope I still have time, Mas Pugo. But the other issue that I want to highlight in a paper like this is really the definition itself, right? What we actually mean when we talk about corruption. So Mas Rimawan also quote this general definition: the misuse of public position to obtain private gain, right? But I think the term public here, it really limits the anti-corruption policies within the domain of public sector. So we cannot really discuss about corruption in private sector, for example, right? So MacLeod used this other definition, that the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. So not just for public position here. So this definition welcomes scrutinies into non-public sector. So maybe that when I read the paper, the title "Unregulated Corruption," this can be addressed by this type of definition. But it turns out what Mas Rimawan mean by unregulated corruption, at least from the presentation, I see it's still related to interaction between private and public sector and public sector in the sense of public officials. So we need to have a clarity on this definition. And then there is Mas Rimawan said that the deterrence effect is conditional on the type of crimes, right? I agree completely. But also, I think it is the conditional on the type of corruption when it comes to corruption as the crime, right? So distinguishing the types of corruption is important. And that leads me to another paragraph from Pak Mubyarto's paper, and he quotes the comment from Admiral Sudomo, right? So Pak Sudomo said that while acknowledging the seriousness of corruption problem, while he acknowledged the seriousness of corruption problem, he said, it has not been proved that society has directly borne the brunt of corruption. Perhaps development has prevented this from coming. If this is the case, would it not be wiser to wait and see whether development will be obstructed? And are there any large-scale projects that have been retarded through corruption? This sounds like, if this is said today, I think this is really incorrect in a sense. It gives some leeway to doing corruption, right? But of course, the question is what type of corruption did he refer to here? And that leads me to this typology of corruption. This is by a political scientist from University of Michigan, Yuan Ang. So she actually criticized the single index that we've been using so far when we study corruption, including quoted in Mas Rimawan's paper from Corruption Perception Index from Transparency International. And then there is another one, World Governance Index from the World Bank, right? But it's only one single index from 0 to 100. And then they rank all the countries based on that. And we take that as the only indicator of how corrupt a country is. So Yuan Ang said that that's not really helpful in trying to target the fight against corruption more effectively. So she has this 2x2 matrix, and we can see that she divides non-elites and elites. So non-elites are street level government officials, and then elites, of course, the top level. And then the corruption itself, she divides into theft and exchange. So corruption involving theft and involving exchanges. So we have this petty theft, grand theft, speed money, and access money. So from these four types of corruption, 1, 2, 3 actually illegal. But for access money, it can be legal and can be illegal, right? So think about high-profile access government or the president or the leader of the country give to very big multinational, for some big project at the cost of, public or competition among firms and things like that. But speed money is actually just, from non-elites or low level of the government. Think about SIM, KTP, or things like that, right? So basically, Mas Rimawan is only looking at this grand theft and speed money. I think from the experiment, it's the embezzlement here and then bribery here. So we miss looking at these four. And this paper, Yuan Ang has popularized this paper. If you're interested, the book, award-winning book, it's China's Gilded Age. Explaining the paradox of China's growth and fast corruption.
Dr. Arianto, you have 2 minutes?
Yeah. One more slide. So this is the result of her what she called unbundled corruption index. And I think it's quite interesting if we can look at the result, because, for example, Indonesia, even though the total index is quite similar to, say, other countries, in Nigeria, for example, but the dominant corruption is different, right? So Indonesia is dominated by access money, while Nigeria, for example, is embezzlement, right? I think the way we look at the corruption like this will help us target the fighting against corruption more effectively. And I think this is also related to studies like Mas Rimawan is doing. And again, thank you for the opportunity to comment. I know I go a bit outside the experimental approach that Mas Rimawan does. I'm not an experimental economist myself, but I think it's good to have more disciplined narrative, more tight narrative in trying to tell a story and then about corruption. So it's more discipline, good definition, and we know what we actually are discussing about. So that's my comment, and thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Arianto, to share your perspective and comment on the research. Okay, we moving to the next discussion. Last but not least, I would like to invite Dr. Vivi Alatas to discuss the presentation. 15 to 20 minutes. The time is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me try to share my presentation. Can you see it?
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah.
Cool.
So again, it is an honor for me to participate in this discussion. This is a very fascinating paper. I told Pak Rim that I read it word by word, and I asked him a lot of questions, which coming from my ignorance. The author conduct laboratory experiment in which subjects are able to conduct actions that mimics public corruption while avoiding normative cues that may nudge their behavior. Okay. So as already mentioned by Pak Rimawan and also Pak Arianto Patunru, the main findings, they show that the impacts of increasing the intensity of punishment tend to reduce both the likelihood of the incidents and the intensity of corruptions, which leads them to conclude the deterrence effect is present. Contrary, they emphasize to the findings of Nisi and Rusticini. I share what Pak Arianto Patunru mentions, that I think this Nisi and Rusticini is not really an apple-to-apple comparisons with the research questions regarding the role of increasing and extracting motivation in behaviors change. Regardless of this, the focus on understanding when and how deterrence effect happen is very important. So let me try to look at the other findings. I think that there are other findings which is very interesting. They found that the incidence of corruption in the control group is around 18.75% to 26.62% higher than the modest punishment group, while increasing punishment from modest to severe punishment, which is huge, 2.5 times of the amount embezzled, only reduce the incident ratio by 1.24%. I think this finding is very interesting and support the insights from other paper that the author already mentions, which is from Abing, Irlandbis, and Renner, who found that the mere presence of punishment lower both bribes, over, and acceptance rate by subject. And I think this have strong policy implication about the importance of focusing on preventing corruption by making clear, timely, and salient information about the sanctions from various petty and not so petty corruptions. But one of the big questions when reading this paper is, are people being rational? Especially when they try to put in their instructions that there is no right or wrong decisions. Let's try to look at the payoff based on various scenarios, because like if people are being rational, this is from Becker that the author already mentioned, this implies that individuals are able to evaluate the expected cost and the expected benefit of doing so and make decisions based upon their own evaluations. So what I would like to try, this is just like from looking at like a very quick and dirty estimates about the payoff. Let's look at control group first. The author called the participants who have the opportunity to embezzle being John. So let's call him John. And let's try to call John as player one. Then his payoff will be the amount of like his initial original amount minus his contribution plus the embezzlement amount and his shares of the remaining public goods. Suppose P is the proportion of public good that he embezzles. Then payoff will be maximum when P is equal 1 and the payoff become 100 plus C2 plus C3. Which is like the other people contribution. So his payoff does not depend on his own contribution. So if his objective function is maximizing his profit, John will take all the amount of public good when there is no sanction. Of course, I'm just looking at one-shot games. It will be more complex if we try to look at around like a repeated games. So what about in treatment 1? John will also tend to embezzle in treatment 1 because the penalty is very, very small. If he did not embezzle, his payoff will be similar to the no control, the control group. His payoff from embezzlement will be higher than non-embezzling if 0.5E is more than 3.75. It means that if his embezzlement is more than 7.5, unit, then he actually will be better off doing embezzlement. So only when the total amount of public goods that can be embezzled is very small, John's will be better off not to embezzle. And John also will maximize his payoff if he's being like maximizing his profit, his profit by doing all the amount of the contributions. What about treatment 2? His expected payoff from treatment 2 will have to take into account the sanction, which is 2.5 of the times of embezzlement. And as Rimawan already mentions, like when he's being caught, he could have like 0 total amounts of payoff, especially if the amount of embezzlement we could say in here is actually we could compute. And it's actually more than 50 plus 0.25 times the other contribution minus his own contributions. What's interesting here is John only benefits from embezzlement as long as he does not take too much money. So he cannot be too greedy in here. But he will also tend to contribute less because the cutoff depends on his contribution. But the incidence of embezzlement itself will not differ as long as he does not take too much money. But of course, I'm not just looking at one-shot game, and we need to take into account what will happen to him in the subsequent games when he learns about what happened with the sanction. But if John is being rational, he cannot expect that the other persons will not also be rational. For other participants, let's say for player 2, his or her payoff is the original amount of money minus his contribution plus his share of the remaining public goods after embezzlement. Let's talk first if there is no embezzlement. If there is no embezzlement, and we are trying, if K1 is the proportions of the embezzlements for player 1, K2 for player 2, and the proportions of contribution of player 1, K2 is for player 2, and K3 is for player 3. So his or her payoff for this non-John participant will be 100 plus 50 times K1 plus K3, the other participants' proportions of contribution, minus 50 times of like his proportion of contribution. The payoff will be maximized when K2 is equal 0. If all the participants does not trust each other willingness to contribute, they will not contribute, and their payoff will still be just 100, which is similar to their initial money. But if there is a trust that other people willing to contribute, let's suppose that K1 is equals to K2 and K3, then his or her payoff will be 100 plus 50K. And this payoff will be maximized if they contribute all. So there is a sense of prisoner dilemma here. There is another equilibrium if they trust each others. So if the participants trust each other and there's no embezzlement, they will each can get a better payoff of 150 instead of just getting the 100 when they don't have any corporations. So what happened? What about if they believe that there is an embezzlement? If there is an embezzlement, then let's try to talk. The embezzlement E is being P times the total amount of contribution, and against the K1, K2, and K3 is the proportions of the contribution for each players. Then the players to pay off will be more than 100 only on one condition. If P, which is the proportions of being embezzled, is less than K1 plus K3 minus K2 divided by K1 plus K2 plus K3. To give you a sense how much is this threshold, if all contribute the same portion, then P need to be less than 1/3. Only if they believe the other player who have the chance of doing embezzlement only will embezzle around 1/3 of the total contribution, they are better to contribute. If not, they shouldn't contribute. So several puzzle of the findings, if I just look of this one shot payoff. In treatment 1, because the expected penalty is just 3.75 unit, it is surprising that we see a big decrease in occurrence of embezzlement compared to the control group, especially when we take into account that the authors try to make it, there is non-cues of moral cues here. There is no right or wrong in deciding what needs to be done. The other interesting finding is also the author finds that the subjects tend to contribute less into the public pool as punishment severity increases. Correct me if I'm wrong, Rimawan, on this. Even without penalty, when there is no trust, subject will tend to contribute less. If we just look at the payoff, there is no clear mechanisms that will induce participants to contribute less when severity of punishment increases, because they should infer the huge increase of penalty can make John less likely to embezzle more. So that's, but looking at the data, I think the data is quite rich, and I think there are additional insights that can also be examined from the data. For example, I think the authors can try to look whether the player tend to lower or increase the bribe conditions of being accepted or being rejected in the subsequent round when they have opportunity to bribe again. Do the amount of bribe positively correlated with the amount of embezzlement? Do we see different results between male and female among income group or based on different faculty or department? For example, toward exams, we see different results from the ilmu economy students versus the other department, for example. But there are a lot of insights that we can get from such type of experiments, not only on corruption, but also on elite capture phenomena, on dana desa, for example, or even fraud on certain social assistance programs, social protection program. I can see that we can try to expand the experiment to give insights on many things. This is such a fascinating experiment for me. I learn a lot, but it will be great if there is opportunity to expand it, as Pak Rim already mentioned, not only among UGM students, not only among students, but trying to mimic all kind of interesting group of participants and location. Testing whether we see different results from group who know each other before. Conduct experiment where decision to embezzle or not is done by group or part of the group. How about different type of information to help them making an informed or rational choices? What about if the bot changed to actual persons, part of the player or part of the research team? So there are a lot of interesting other, and also there are what I'm intrigued is other ways to conduct semi-real experiment that link to actual program or policies. I have an experience of conducting experiment on targeting that link to actual PKH decision. But I'm not quite sure whether in these cases, when we talk about corruptions, can we try to work together with some of the programs, try to understand better, because it is in their interest to understand better about error, fraud, and corruption. Other ways or example of conducting natural experiments of corruption studies. For example, do we have different sanction? If we have different sanction by different kabupaten, can we see different impact around the boundaries of the kabupaten? For example, like on like traffic violation, for example, or other. Testing whether we see a correlation of being involved in petty corruption, whether it will increase willingness to participate in not so petty corruption later on. So again, Pak Rimawan, thank you very much for the opportunities to read and provide comments on this very interesting paper. I learned a lot and really enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Vivi, for the valuable comments and perspective on the presentation and the paper. Before we move to Q&A session, maybe I will give opportunity to Dr. Rimawan to respond on the Dr. Arianto and Dr. Vivi feedback from your presentation, maybe from definition, clear policy implications, and also maybe about the puzzle and the further studies.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for Pak Aco and also Bu Vivi for the comment. And I just want to clarify with Pak Aco, that's actually what we meant by the unregulated corruption is basically the corruption among the, for instance, among the private corruptions, private corporation, because there is no law, as I said, because the data that we have is the data for the involvement of the private corruption in the public sector corruption. So they have some sort of like, what is that? Public goods provision, something like that. And then they involve in the contract. And then there is some kind of a bribery or something. But if there is among the corporation, among the private corporation, they do corruption, we don't have that kind of data because the law enforcer cannot do anything in Indonesia. And we see, fortunately, in 2015, for instance, I had an opportunity to do research, and then we found the existence of bank within bank. But this kind of practice cannot be seen in we cannot find it in a state-owned enterprise bank. But then that's quite a lot in private sector. So this is the. But I think thank you very much for the feedback. You know, both Pak Aco and also Bu Vivi, and quite rightly when you mentioned about that, this one is not comparable between the Uzi Gnisi paper with our corruption. It's true, but then what we're trying to see here is that we remove the situation of the corruption itself, like in a what is that? In an experiment, in lab experiment, we don't say about corruption. We just say that okay, you may take the money, for instance, and we don't because if we talk about corruption, what we're afraid of is some sort of like a framing effect that people may think, oh, if I take this, then I will feel guilty. Or you know, I'm not supposed to do this because this is a corruption. So we avoid that kind of narratives in our in the instruction in such a way that we want to see the underlying behavior of the people. And it's quite rightly Mbak Vivi pointed out about the if we estimate the expected value, then of course it should be. The idea, if we talk about the public goods game, is like a prisoner's dilemma. This is like a social dilemma games. The Nash equilibrium is actually don't contribute. But the fact people are contributing, and this is one stage. And then the second one is that this is a decision making by uncertainty. Actually, that what we're trying to impose. Because in real life, we never know about the probability of being convicted and etc. But then, the result is quite what is that? It's quite striking, actually. That's actually people do not have any reason to contribute, for instance. But in fact, they contribute anyhow. The map that from Ang, I think that's you do it right. I mean, we only concern about the big corruption, but for a small corruption, we don't take that into consideration. From Mbak Vivi perspective, I think it's about the extension of the study is quite interesting to see that. Now we need to explore more about comparison between male and female, and also with the non-economic student and economic student. Now the complexity here is that when we trying to make a group, we don't split into the male group or based on gender or based on the faculty. And another problem is that once the public goods game once has been conducted, and then afterward only one individual has been chosen randomly to make a decision. Now, in relation to the board, what would happen if we replace the board? This is very interesting, but at that time we cannot do that, because if we want to do that, then probably we need to increase the number of a participant, not 3 but 5. So 5 people playing the public goods game, and then afterward 2 of them will involve in a bribery game. I think that's very, very interesting to see that. But creating 5 and then you randomize, it's daunting. That's another thing that time. And also, to be honest, it's a limited budget, because in experiment we have to pay all of the participants, and also even though we're trying to find at that time what is that, the subject pool. The subject pool is 540, but this one is a subject pool that hasn't been conducted systematically. If we do in other centers in Europe, for instance, they open a recruitment solely for the subject pool, and they have a contract for 1 year. Now, I think this kind of exercise will be done now. Mas Rian is in charge on developing our lab experiment to be more systematic, and especially to collect to gather the the subject pool, because subject pool is not easy to get. And also by the time you run there's another problem, is that when we run the experiment, and then we need to deal with the the time when students sometimes do some research, teaching, there's some kind of lecture, that kind of stuff. So that's sometimes, there's a back from the office about the complexity. But I'm very interested to extend it to be 5, not 3, but 5, if it is possible. And then we do real bribery game, as in the Klaus Abing's paper. I think that's for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rimawan, for the to respond for the discussion perspective and feedback. Okay, now we move to the Q&A sessions. As I mentioned before, we have two ways. First, if you want to ask the question directly to speaker, please raise your hand, use the button, and I will call you to ask the questions. And the second way is also you can put your question in the chat box. Okay, is there anyone to directly?
Can I answer the question from the chat box? Mas?
Oh yeah.
First of all, from Pa Alex, that saying that in an experimental approach, the participant might not have the same social pressure, guilt, and other people expectation to do the right thing, which might affect the result. How can this psychological factor be modeled in an experiment? Now, that actually what we're trying to do is that, the question is that what would happen if you don't have the pressure? So the question is in reverse. You know, we trying to the experiment allow us to do so. When doing corruption, we don't label it as a corruption, for instance, and we don't expose who are the perpetrator, for instance, in this experiment, because we want to see what would happen if we, you know, what are the behavior of a people when they face that kind of a challenge. So that's my answer, Pak.
It's Ibu Mas Rimawan.
Oh,
Ibu Alex.
I'm sorry.
From Indonesia Project.
Okay. Okay, so this one, dear panelists, there has been this is from Mas Darendra Wardana. Dear panelists, there has been a proposition that corruption can be reduced, at least mitigated through remuneration improvement. For instance, within the scope of public services. Do you think it is necessarily true? In my opinion, yes. But it's outside of this paper. But in my opinion, we need to improve the way we pay the mechanism to incentivize the public sector worker. For instance, I think the one interesting thing in Indonesia is that many best practices is actually already in Indonesia. For instance, if we talk about using a single salary system, for instance, and the salary is a comparative, we can relate to the BI or a KPK, the old KPK, for instance. The old KPK, the salary, the way the salary has been paid is based on the single salary system, and also remember the relief action from in Aceh, for instance. They have a body for the relief action in Aceh. They paid decently and they use the single salary system, but the key performance indicator is the output or the outcome, not budget absorption. The problem in Indonesia is that within the public sector, we have three different systems of heterogeneity of incentives. And this is a problematic. And on top of that, we still have the key performance indicator, which is, it shouldn't be used, which is the budget absorption. So this is the November and December, we will see that many civil servants doing something that actually unproductive, but cannot, so long as it's absorbed the money. Any moments?
Okay, we have a third question from Asi Halomoan. Comment for Pak Rimawan. Yes. It's quite long. Thank you for the presentation. Presentation, very good to hear. On the findings and on the findings, when there is a high corruption, there is a high contribution. I think to some extent, this is not surprising.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, indeed, that is not surprising. But what's surprising is when the contribution is high, when the corruption is also high. So that's in the control group. Then that's why I'm asking, whether are we consider this as some sort of like revelation aversion, that people do not want to see the reality. The reality might be too harsh for them, it's too tough for them. Now, this is the one that actually we would like to raise the issue. And the second one is experiment across several universities. If you want to expand it, perhaps to other different group of society. So this is related to another group of society. Now, this is the problem in experiment. Yeah. Why is it that we are prone to use the student? Because student is actually wonderful subject for the experiment. You can ask so complex instruction, and you don't need to compensate them with a huge amount of money. We did, however, trying to do experiment to the trader, for instance, and it's so difficult. Why? Because they're always asking about the opportunity cost. When we ask, and even if we go to the market and then we trying to run the experiment in the market, they're always asking, okay, how much money the maximum that I can get? And I said 350,000 rupiahs. And then he said, I'm sorry, Pak, that's I can get that less than 10 minutes or 20 minutes. And I don't want to come to your experiment because it takes more than 1 hour. It's logical, it's rational, but it is not easy. You know, if we want to do the experiment with the, I call it as like a real players. We managed to do that with the informal sector, for instance. The trader in the market, usually they're selling vegetables or things like that. Yeah, but we need to give them a compensation quite substantial. Now, this is the problem that we have as well. It is not easy to find the funding, and most of the studies that we do in experiment, we just spend all of the money for the compensation of the participation. And if you now that's the experiment that we got. Another experience I would like to share with you is. I went to Germany and presented a paper, and then when I said to them, you know, this one is from the household, and they were surprised, and they asked me, how much money do you pay for that? Oh, maximum is 400,000 rupiahs, and they said to me, for us, we try to send 2,000 invitation, and for the showing up fee is 40 euro at that time, and it's turned out to be they only managed to get 200 people. So that's another, you know, people. I mean, this is not an easy way, to do the experiment if we extend this. Now, from Pak Ross. Now, I'm sorry, Pak Ross. This is I'm a bit disagree, Pak Ross. This is based on corruption is not much a problem in private sector because employees or managers are rewarded of high integrity. If they were not, they would tend to act corruptly. Civil servants in Indonesia are not rewarded sufficiently for high integrity, especially at high level. So corruption is endemic. It's true, but the problem is that even in Indonesia, in the private sector in Indonesia, they do have some kind of bribery, that kind of stuff among them. If they were caught, of course they will be fired. It's true. But then this situation occurs as well. Another thing is that if you check to there are some cases of corruption that I handled lately, and that's involved the private corporation. When I check the institutional system within them, it's just unbelievable. So there is no such thing as an audit committee, for instance. There is no such thing as a risk committee under the commissioner, for instance. And the name of the CEO, what is that? Like a CEO, what is that? The board of the director and the board of the commissioner is actually only 4 people. And then so 2 people in the board of director and 2 people in the board of the commissioner, and then they will be just rotated in other companies, so long as that belong to certain group. So this is another type of corruption that we need to care about, and usually this one is related to the family corporation. And then family corporation, when you ask to the CEO, what is your decision? And then they will say, well, I have to rely on the son number X and the son number Y, or the daughter, or and etc. Please, Pak.
Okay, Prof. Rospekla, maybe we will have a response to what Dr. Rimawan respond, please.
Thank you, Pak Pugo, and thanks for your response, Pak Rimawan. I just wanted to explain a little bit or elaborate what I said in that comment. But Acho has already referred everybody to my paper. It hasn't been published yet, but it's if you would like a copy, please let me know. The point that I was making, if I elaborate a little bit longer, is not only do you have to pay people to show high integrity, of course, that implies that you have to monitor their behavior. And if they're not acting with high integrity, then in the private sector, you get rid of them. Unfortunately, in the public sector in Indonesia, very few bureaucrats who've been caught out being corrupt actually lose their jobs. The penalties are very, very slight, if any. So there are really two aspects there. One is paying people not only to be good at their job, but to show high integrity. And secondly, you must monitor behavior and act on what you find. You promote people who are good, you get rid of people who are bad. So I just wanted to add that bit of explanation.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Ross. And maybe I will back a little bit to the Mas Darendra Wardana questions, because it's also a question to the Pak Ajo and Bu Vivi. There has been a proposition that corruption can be reduced or at least mitigated through remuneration improvement. For instance, within the scope of public service, do you think this is necessarily true in different contexts, private sector? Many thanks, because only Pak Rimawan that answered the question. Please, Pak Ajo, maybe first.
Yeah, I don't have much to add there, Mas Pugo. I think I agree with Ross that in the private sector, they usually, reward integrity with good payment, and those who cannot perform get kicked out of the private companies very easily compared to the system in the public sector, right? So I think that's what happens between private and public sectors.
Okay, Bu Vivi.
I also do not have any papers on this, but I think on the private sectors, probably fraud and error can be decreased. For example, if the remunerations improvement, etc. Happens in here. In terms of to what extent that it will decrease the corruptions among private sectors, I do not have the expertise to answer on this.
Okay, there is a question, but wait, I will put it in from Zulfadli Nasution. The questions, thanks Pak Rimawan and the panelists. My question, beside what Mr. Arianto Patunru said about the typology of corruption by Ang, Grand, Petty, so on. Maybe we should also look after the typology of corrupt actors in terms of their financial issue. For example, until what level of employee the remuneration or financial matters. Since I think the high rank official businessmen with higher income are also not sterile from corruption, even they are often called with more corruption. Okay, maybe I'll put in the chat box, because it's put in the, okay. About the type of other typology, Pak Rimawan.
Okay, about the typology, that usually many people there are related to the typology on this, because some people said that people do corruption because they have to do, because their salary are not sufficient, then they have to do. Another one is because of greediness. But I have another one, which is actually quite worrying, especially in Indonesia. You may be a good person, but by the time you join into you become the civil servant, for instance, then you are accustomed to have to some extent you are being forced to do corruption. So this is some kind of, in the long run, this is some kind of like a learning process. At first, you're a good person, but then the situation will force you to do a corruption. And then in the end, it's become greedy. Now that's the third path, this one, this usually hasn't been explored, honestly. But I think that will be very interesting to see. For instance, if we trying to compare between those who are who work in a BI, for instance, with a common a civil servant, for instance, or against the old system with the KPK. So we see how what's going on. I think that's in a typology. But then how to accommodate that into the experiment? Honestly, I don't know how to do that, to be honest.
Okay, there is a question from Lelis Tiono. It will be interesting to see the type of punishment beyond monetary punishment. For example, a limit of their access to future opportunities, as the example of the American sex offender registry, to put barrier for them to access their victim or new victims. Maybe the panelists can give a comment on that.
Mbak Vivi or Pak Aco?
Mbak Vivi or Pak Aco?
Let me read again the questions. So this is, Pak Rimawan might be the right one, but I don't know whether to what extent, besides that making them to become poor, shame or name may have an effect here, because I think we do have quite a lot of examples of people still being regarded, like already conducted corruptions, but still can continue within the political sectors or others. So I'm not quite sure what kind of, like, it's probably a specific types of like really understanding what works for what kind of like other punishments may matters in here. But the other things that I would like to also, Pugo, I would like to also talk regarding not whether people corrupt because of like they need to do it. We have a lot of emphasis of the corrupt people are actually very, very rich. So we cannot really say that they have like coming back to, if only their remuneration increase, they will not do it again. I think it is important to, of course, like it's coming back to, we could only do it like in experiment sectors, to what extent that they do the berjamaah, corrupting as a berjamaah, like as a group thing, and whether it is possible, or also try to look whether there is a positive deviant stories that people are able to be not corrupt in a very corrupt institutions. What happens? How to be a positive deviant cases, to be not corrupt. I don't know. The institutions can be police. The institutions can be certain programs or certain like for example in the kelurahan or in dana desa. But understandings like I think like if Indonesia would like to address corruption, the opportunities to not to be corrupt in a corrupt situation is something that people need to understand better.
Yeah. Okay. Pak Aca, maybe.
Not much to add. I think for the classification for very high level government officials, but still have exchange in terms of corruption, it is included in the fourth quadrant of typology, right? And as for the different type of punishment, I think it's just a matter of increasing the disutility of punishment that I mentioned before, but I don't know which type of other punishment that is appropriate for Indonesian case.
Yeah, Pak Rimawan maybe.
Okay, if I can add, I think what Pak Aco said is quite important especially when related to the probability of the benefits. Why? Because actually in other countries, especially in the OECD, there is no such thing as reoffending behavior for the corruptor. Once you do corruption and then you are convicted, and that's it. You are not in the position to be a public officer, or Ross is a public trustee, public trustee. No, you cannot do that. But that in Indonesia, we do have many cases in which even one of the bupati or municipal leader in Java, in Central Java, there has been raided twice, OTT twice. What would happen with that? And what was going on in here? Now, this is the situation. I think the problem is in the benefit itself. The expected benefit itself is huge, and because the system that we create allow them to do reoffending behavior. Now, this is the problem. It's a huge problem. This is totally different from the countries in OECDs, for instance.
Okay, thank you, Pak Rimawan. Now we have Blaine Lewis raise their hand. Please, can ask the question.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Please, Pat.
Okay, good. Yeah, thanks for an interesting presentation. I don't want to be too critical, but I'm wondering what it is we actually learned from this exercise. I mean, I presume that in an experiment like this, you would like to be able to generalize about the results to some population of interest, either those who do corruption or those who potentially do corruption. And you've got instead a sample of students from which you would like to make generalizations about government and private sector corruption. And you said yourself the reason you use students is because they don't care much about money, whereas the entire experiment is about the corruption of money. I'm just wondering the extent to which we actually learn anything of interest in this kind of experiment. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak. This is very valid point. Many experiments that has been done, even in OECD countries, involving a student, and usually the way they do is trying to test the theory. And in such a way, when they're trying to test the theory, the design is quite simple. For instance, like decision making under risk and uncertainty, or game, playing a game theory, that kind of stuff. Now, many studies also trying to compare between I call it as a real players and the student, and they don't see any differences in their attitude. Now, but then this is something that I need to underline in here. Those kind of research has been conducted mostly in OECD country or in Europe or in America, whereby culturally the students are quite independent. By the time they are in a university, they're not like a student in Indonesia, whereby they probably until they got a job, until they get married, they still live with their parents. Now, unfortunately, this kind of now the question is that is there any differences if we use the student here in these circumstances in Indonesia or in other, for instance, in Malaysia, for instance, with the real players? We don't know as yet. Now, this is the question. Now, in relation to the generalization, it's very interesting to see what Selton said. Reinhard Selton said that one experiment is actually only one data. We need to do so many data. Now there's a problem with the experiment whereby the internal validity of the experiment is quite high, but the external validity of that is quite poor. So I think more studies should be done in this kind of setting in order to see whether is there any systematic violation, for instance. And we see that for instance, from decision-making under risk and uncertainty, and also in the game theory, for instance, people prove that there are so many experiments, people are deviate from the rationality, and then now they call it as a noise, for instance. But then that's after several years that they do the experiment, and they're trying to, and then they found the systematic violation. Probably that's my insight.
Thank you, Pak Iwan. Prof. Blaine, any response on that? Or?
Well, I mean, you said it yourself, right? The experiment has a high internal validity, but not much external validity at all. I mean, I think that's a big problem, right? I mean, you're trying to generalize about potential corruption at the government level using a bunch of students. I mean, it's just a huge sample selection bias. I think it's not totally devoid of meaning, of course, but nearly so. Sorry to say.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Professor Blaine.
Pak Budi?
We have Pak Budi. Raise the hand, please. Question.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity. And so I would like to further question even about internal validity. I just wonder whether the game that you experiment in is something that we would like to actually mimic. So the number one is that if you look what happened in Indonesia, the institution that's supposed to provide deterrence is actually could be affected.
Yes.
So the quality of the institution that could deterrence is not exogenous in this case. So your game is not representing what is actually happened even in the miniature situation. So there's something else that you need to simulate to be able to understand how and what happened within the reality of corruption in Indonesia that is important to make it work or not to make it work. Because at the moment, the conclusion is, we already know, but look at the Indonesian case. Even you have the right player, that's not the same. It's not the game that we would like to actually test. So that is my argument. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak. It's in our experiment. Of course, that's we put the based on the assumption that the law enforcer will do as they should function, and you said it's right that this in terms of the in reality that is not the case. But then what we're trying to see here is that what would happen if people we ask them, we say to them, there is no right or wrong, for instance. You can do what you can do as a game, and then this is some sort of like what we can see is the underlying behavior. That's what we interested more actually. Indeed, there is if we ask whether this kind of game is fully represented the real world, of course not. But look at the experiment in decision making under risk and uncertainty, for instance. Then people may ask, is there any when we're talking about the violation of independent axiom, for instance, the independent axiom is never, to some extent, is never exist basically, and then people start thinking about the betweenness, and then people start thinking about changing the expected utility function, that kind of stuff, and also from game theoretical perspective, and then they add some more aspect, which is like fairness and a trembling hand, that kind of stuff, to explain the gap between what we're trying to predict and then what the actual behavior. That if the requirement is to mimic that completely in the real life, that's I think your point is correct.
Okay. So if I can respond to that, is that so then what is the point? Meaning that we don't want to draw a conclusion and trying to say something about, in this case, what we would like to learn is that, because the introduction, you talk about corruption in Indonesia, and then you're trying to use this game, trying to understand some of the component of the corruption in Indonesia, but it is not the right game. And so what's the point? Also, what lesson learned that we can actually exactly get? So that's my, I think you need to argue a little bit more that your game is actually a valid game to play. That's number one. That's number principle. That we are playing a game that is valid, and that is the one that I personally miss those arguments. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. We have two questions from Melinda Hutapea. It's related to corruption is habit. Is people in Indonesia just conduct a corruption just as a part of habits? And Ignatius Adam also asking, corruption in Indonesia is a matter of habit, mentality, and character. What is the most appropriate solution for person by person or groups? Maybe Pak Rimawan have this, and
I think the corruption occurred because of the system. So back again to what Pak Aco said about the expected benefit and expected cost. It's true. We see the situation in the reformation of the PT KAI, the train company in Indonesia. Prior to 2004, there are so many people ride the train without any ticket, and if you see the numbers of passengers, it's enormous because sometimes they go to the roof. But then after 2004, they do some kind of reformation, and that start from the discussion between the ministry, between Pak Jonan at that time with the head of the Gambir station. He asked, how many kids do you have? And he said 3. So are they at school? Yes, one is in senior high school and etc. But then how much money do you earn? And then he said the salary is 3.75 million. And Pak Jonan said, no, of course, well, in that circumstance, is it sufficient if you live in Jakarta, or do you have to do corruption? And then the guy said, if I'm not doing corruption, then I will not live there. But now that's after that they changed the incentive system, and then we can see the improvement, sharp improvement. So many people talking about morality in doing the corruption because of the morality and etc. But to me I think it's about the incentive system. The incentive system that we wrongly put it. We don't see human as a human. We always see human as some sort of like a superhero that willing to accept a small amount of money, but they can work like a donkey. I'm sorry to use that kind of word, but that's a situation that we usually in Indonesia. What I call pengabdian is basically pengab. Yeah, it's stuffy. It's not what is that a social word, but it's really they cannot do anything. So they forced to do corruption by the system. That's my opinion.
Okay, maybe Pak Aco or Bu Vivi have an additional comment on that character. Yeah. So
no,
I have additional comment. I have additional comments more on the increasing the external validity. I think like corruption is like one of the biggest problem in Indonesia. We do need to learn. Of course, it is difficult to learn, especially it's being like this iceberg situation, but also not really easy to conduct the actual experiments within the program. But I think like in terms of like try to reach outside students, like technology actually help us a lot. For example, like in this situation, I understand that you don't need them to meet. You can do it through internet, through platform, making like a special application, and you could try to do it and on certain times at night to decrease the reservation wage. You also probably need to try to do more persuasive, trying to get like the sampling framework that actually more mimicking the whole populations better. In a lot of countries, they try to do it through the Amazon Turk. But I think that there are ways to do these experiments that actually involving not only just students, but of course, in some cases, you might want to improve the amount that they got out of this to to be able to mimic the actual, because it depends on the probability of doing it versus the gain minus the probability of being caught times the punishment. We need to look at it in more careful manners to try as much as possible to mimic what certain type of corruption. And I think there is a need to also already, instead of like making it to general all kind of a corruption, choose certain type of like corruption that you want to mimic with this game, and then try to do it like both on these three types of like the four types of like factors. Try to do it as much as possible similar to what happened in the ground. So unlike like other participants, I would like to see more of this kind of experiments happen in Indonesia, because if we don't have any data then and any ways to know what happened, what will need to be improved, then we cannot expect that there will be much improvement.
Okay, thanks, Bu Vivi. Maybe Pak Ajat have additional.
I don't have addition. Thanks.
Additional, yeah, 40. Okay. We have Bu Lely. Raise your hand, please.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. And I would actually comment on Ibu Vivi's comment about the need of this kind of experiment to be happening a lot more in Indonesia, because yes, it is quite difficult to measure corruptions and experiment in the real situation. So we need this game and experiment to measure stuff. But I agree, it's with Blaine as well, that the game theory should be placed on a certain hypothesis and theory that it will be more applicable in the real life situations. I think when Pak Arianto explained about the theory that Pak Mubyarto said, it's a combination between opportunities and also the motivations. We could come from, you can make a game from that simulate the opportunities and motivations, and then draw conclusions out of that experiment. The second point that I would like to make is about related to my initial comment, to have a different kind of punishment in terms of, so yes, for the small level, maybe, look, therefore small level, they have to pay penalty or fine or something like that. But for the grand theft, for example, that has been done by politicians, by the business people, it might be restricting them to go into a political positions, or restricting them to bid for another projects, or restricting them to have access to bank loan, because I think it's important as well to learn from other countries that have those kind of mechanism to stop, not only to stop reoffending, but stop the practices from the beginning. And for the comments about character flaws, I think I agree with Pak Ros. It's unfair to judge general populations is corrupt. I think we come back with the initial theory from Pak Mubyarto. It's between opportunity and motivations. If we don't have a good system, transparent system that accountable to the public and can be checked by everyone, the opportunity is big for people to make a corruption, to do a corrupt practices, no matter it's in the public or in the private sector. I think that's all my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Bu Lely. Maybe Pak Rimawan have response to this.
No, I agree with that. I mean, that's good. That's good. Thank you for addressing that. As I said before, the system, the benefit system, that's enable people in Indonesia become to do their offending behavior for the corruption. Even for the corruption, they can do their offending behavior, something that in other countries they cannot do that.
Sorry, just to add a little bit, I'm just thinking about the idea of gaming. It could be as simple as people who got caught of being corruption in the game, they
Yeah.
got kicked out of the game. Will that be a motivation for them to do a corrupt behavior if they know the penalty will get kicked out of the game altogether if they get caught once?
Oh, it's interesting proposition actually, but and of course there is some complexity in there, which is we need to have a large group of people. Yeah, probably need if that's one stage, he will be caught and things like that, and then the number of people playing the public goods game will shrink, right? At some point will shrink. Now, it's very nice, but then. I can imagine the complexity is also in there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have one last in the chat question in the chat. Corruption needs to be overcome with incentive and disincentive schemes, as well as digital-based public policy to ensure accountability. And it is very important that special level education for corruption from Muhammad Eka Kusuma. Pak Rimawan for.
Now this is for the education level of education. I think there is some problem that we have. We don't when we are kid, we are not learning about whether this one is allowed or this one is not allowed. It's totally different from the pupil in Japan, for instance. For us, we never learn about that, during the kindergarten until the high school. What we learn is about, Charleston or, mathematics and that kind of stuff. But then some politicians and also bureaucrats thinking out loud, saying that, well, you have to teach the anti-corruption in a university. And in my opinion, it's too late, actually. It's too late because people, if we do it in early stages, so this is like the crime prevention literature. They start from preschool, for instance, like preschool, Abersedarian preschool, that kind of stuff. Then you need to do it, start from that beginning, not late until the university. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pak Rimawan. I will open for any question. Raise your hand if there is any more question or respond to the presentations. Okay, maybe last question. Yeah, okay. If there is no more questions, I will wrap up. Thank you to our presenters, Bapak Rimawan Pradiptyo, and discussion Pak Arianto Patunru and Bu Vivi Alatas. And thank you for the participant for attending the 2022 Mubyarto Public Policy Forums. And thank you for all committee that prepared this meeting. It's such a pleasure to moderating these lively public discussions. I hope we can see you again in 2023 Mubyarto Public Policy Forum, and have a nice day.
Thank you, Mas Pugo, Mas Rimawan, Mbak Vivi.
Thank you very much,
everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Terima kasih, Mas Pugo.
Recording stopped.